I'm not going to talk about defenses right now. I'm going to talk about first-round draft pick quarterbacks, John. There were 6 this year. So a couple of them haven't even seen the field yet. Michael Penix, J.J. McCarthy got hurt. He's out for the season. Michael Penix has to sit behind a quarterback who's actually probably playing a little bit better than a lot of people expected because of his injury and probably, I would say, outplaying Aaron Rodgers, at least so far. So we'll see if that continues. But now you've got the quarterbacks that are actually playing. You've got Bo Nix, who in his first couple of outings, not so good, John, had a couple of, I think he had 4 total interceptions. In the last 2 games, he's got no interceptions, 3 touchdowns. I think these guys are starting to at least look like they're getting over the hump to some degree. Caleb Williams, kind of the same thing, John. He had 4 interceptions in the first 3 games, and he hasn't had one since. He's had 3 touchdowns, but no interceptions. Jayden Daniels, though, is the standout, right? I mean, you and I have talked about this kid. This kid is damn near at MVP levels for the league, for crying out loud. I mean, when you look at his numbers, John, and you look at his completion percentage, you look what he's been able to accomplish so far, absolutely. How about his QBR? It's a 106 already this year. I mean, this is a guy who's been, he was Arizona State, then he goes to LSU, gets drafted at a very high spot. But this week, I think what makes this whole thing even more interesting, New England, they're giving up on Jacoby Brissett, and they're going with Drake Maye. And I think the Drake Maye move could be pretty interesting. I don't know that I think, John, he was at the level that everybody else put him, but he's had a little bit of time. He's got a little bit of time to sit back and watch. New England's not terrible, but do they have enough to make it work out for him as a quarterback? That part, I think, is where we need the answer. But you could have said that about Washington, right, before Jayden Daniels took over. I mean, they were a team that had a terrible defense, a terrible offense. They couldn't get much. You didn't even know half the players on the team. And yet that guy now has lit them up, and people are starting to take notice at Washington. Do you think Drake Maye is ready right now, John? Because he is one of the youngest, if not the youngest, of the 6 quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt, Pete, that he's breaking out the same way that the quarterback did in Houston last year for the Texans. It's clearly one of those situations where what you and I said, we love to pat, or at least I love to pat myself on the back, saying we said he should have been the top pick of all the quarterbacks. Stand by it. I think any of the teams that have Caleb Williams or Drake Maye or any of these guys, Pete, including J.J. McCarthy, would love to have this guy because he is a stud. And it looks like he's just getting better each week. So, Caleb Williams, I'm not saying he's terrible. I'm not saying that at all. And, he's starting to come around a little bit. I mean, he's got 1 more touchdown already than Daniels. He's got 5 TD passes, 4 interceptions, and he was the number 1 pick overall in the whole league. So he should have these kinds of numbers. And for the first time, he is having these kinds of numbers, like he's getting better. But he needs to be putting up multiple TDs in games, Pete, rather than, the whole season. His season total is 1,000 yards, 5 TDs, 4 interceptions. The TD to interception ratio is concerning.
Right. Although these guys, I think they're showing that they're getting a little bit better as they've gotten more time to be able to perform at the pro level. And that does take a little bit of time. I mean, other than Jayden Daniels, these other players, John, I think, they threw the interceptions. Now they're not throwing the last couple of games, the interceptions. And I think that is a critical thing, because giving up the ball is something that you just can't afford to do unless you're really an outstanding football team. And none of those teams are outstanding, which is why they had the ability to draft these guys as high as they did, quite frankly. All right, how about a little college football, John?
All right.
So I'm looking at the top 5 right now in college football, right? You've got 3 Big Ten schools and 2 SEC schools. But you also have the ACC kind of scratching at the door a little bit, and then the Big 12. So I was curious what you think, like which one of these teams is likely to be somebody who could make that next step, not only be where they are right now, but get into that top 5. You've got Miami 6-0. You've got Pittsburgh, believe it or not. Pitt is 5-0, so they're undefeated as well. Clemson had their opening game loss, but now they're 4-1. BYU is 5-0 in the Big 12. You've got Iowa State 5-0 in the Big 12. And there's a team that's kind of a sleeper, John. Nobody talks about Texas Tech. They're 5-1. These guys are lighting it up on offense. I mean, they truly are, and have some defense. And all these schools, obviously, they're doing a great job on the defensive side and the offensive side. So for me right now, looking at everybody, I would have to go with Miami, which is the easy pick. But they did struggle against Cal, and Cal gave them all they wanted till the last maybe 6 minutes of the game. And then Cal just sort of fell apart. But Miami's a pretty damn good team, and that was a long flight. You know, that's going to be brutal part of the ACC, having these, you know, teams that are out on the other side with Cal and Stanford. It makes it very interesting. But I think it's Miami and maybe BYU of the two teams in the two different divisions, or the conferences. But how about you? Is there somebody who really stands out that should break up into that top five maybe?
Well, there are some teams, like, for instance, somebody's going to fall out of the top five this week, Pete.
Yep.
Because you got Oregon hosting Ohio State. And that is going to be a game, I think, because Ohio State, they emptied the NIL, Pete, the name, image, and likeness pool for their players this year. They're the highest paid, even higher than the Longhorns, Pete. So I think Ohio State going into Eugene is a really interesting game, because you're looking at, obviously, powerhouse teams with a lot of pro potential players just on both sides. I mean, you know, when they line up, Pete, there might be 22 guys each time, whether it's offense or defense, 22 guys on the field that could be putting on pro jerseys next year. That's how good these two teams are. So, and I'm not saying they're all number one picks, folks, but I am saying, you know, you've got this Dylan Gabriel for Oregon, and Ohio State looks awfully good as well. This is the big test. This is the one that Pete and I talked about at the beginning of the season. This is the big one. Nobody thought the big one was going to be Vanderbilt and Bama, but that might keep Bama out of the playoff contention here, Pete, depending how Vandy does on the, you know, winning out from here. But I like this game the way it's shaping up in Eugene this weekend, Pete.
Yeah, Dan Lanning, the coach there. I love the guy, and I not to throw any bad stuff towards you in Colorado, John, but last year when he defended his guys on the field and then in the locker room after you had all the Colorado players stepping all over and scratching all over the duck on the middle of the field after complaining about somebody doing it the week before in Nebraska, I got to tell you, that one was tough. But I will say this, Colorado's kind of sneaky good too, John. I don't know if it's all about who they've played up to now, or now it gets a lot, you know, more difficult or not. But they're playing great, at least on offense, and they're lighting it up pretty nicely. And you got to give Deion Sanders a lot of credit, because I know the O-line isn't what he thought it was or wanted it to be, but his son continues to throw the rock, and he's throwing it all over the place. And that guy is proving to a lot of people that, you know what, whether you like him or dislike him, he's a hell of a quarterback.
Yep, Shedeur is, Travis Hunter is, and let's not forget, Pete, they had a week off. Colorado didn't play last week, folks. They're playing this week, and they've played really well against UCF and against Baylor, I think it was, Pete. Two teams they knocked off, and they beat UCF badly. Yeah. So could this be that, like Pete's saying, I mean, one loss to Nebraska isn't necessarily a deal breaker for them, but you know, it might help motivate them to continue to play well, because since that loss, they've played better in the post Nebraska era here, Pete.
And what might help them the most, John, is if Nebraska keeps on winning. that helps Colorado on that loss, because the more they win, the better that makes that team that they lost to. So that's something that, believe it or not, they're probably cheering for Nebraska every week.
Yeah, I bet they are. Well, folks, remember, we are offering you a chance to come for free to a great webinar tomorrow, Thursday, at 4:00 Eastern Time. And as we always do, you will register for this, And if you register for it, even if you can't make it at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, we will send you a recording of the event